let's talk about a battle. One single battle that you could argue really set the stage for the entire 20th century. I mean, this thing was a blueprint for future wars, it helped topple an empire, and it announced the entire world that a new power had arrived. This is the story of the Battle of Port Arthur, what some people call World War Zero.
You know that phrase, right? Of course you do. It's forever linked with the attack on Pearl Harbor. But what if I told you the original playbook for that day, the real precedent, was actually written decades earlier, in the freezing cold waters of the Yellow Sea?
So, let's set the scene. The place is Port Arthur. It's a heavily fortified Russian naval base, right at the tip of China's Liaodong Peninsula. The date is February 8th, 1904. Now, tensions between the Russian and Japanese empires are, well, they're at a breaking point. But here's the key. War has not been declared. On this chilly night, you'd think the Russian Pacific Fleet would be on high alert, but nope, it's actually the complete opposite. Aboard the flagship, the Admiral, Oscar Stark, is throwing a massive party for his wife's birthday. The warships are all lit up, music is playing, and a ton of the senior officers are ashore living it up. They are, quite literally, a perfect, unsuspecting target. And as that music plays, 10 destroyers from the Imperial Japanese Navy, running completely dark, no lights, are slicing through the water towards them. They're about to fire the very first shots of a war that is going to completely reshape the global balance of power. So how on earth did this happen? Let's dive right into the details. We're starting right in the middle of the action, with a fleet that has absolutely no idea what's coming. The air is full of celebration, not a hint of suspicion. The scene is just one of staggering vulnerability. I mean, Russia's most powerful ships in the Pacific are just sitting ducks in the outer roads, which is way less protected than the main harbor. And to make it all worse, the Tsar himself had issued a crystal clear order. If war does break out, Japan must be seen as the one who started it. So the Russian forces were ordered not to fire first. Their hands were completely tied. And then, just after midnight, boom, the first torpedoes hit. These massive explosions just rip through the Russian battleships. But the surprise is so total, the party atmosphere so thick, that some of the people on the flagship, no joke, actually mistake the first blasts for celebratory cannon salutes for the admiral's wife. So in the chaos that follows, you've got searchlights frantically sweeping the water, guns starting to fire wildly, and there's one question hanging in the air. Who would dare do this? And maybe more importantly, why? Right, so this attack on Port Arthur didn't just come out of nowhere. Not at all. It was really the violent climax of a decade-long rivalry between Russia and Japan, both fighting for control over Northeast Asia. You can really boil this whole conflict down to a pretty simple geopolitical problem. You've got Russia, this huge land empire that desperately needs a warm water, ice-free port for its navy. Port Arthur is the prize. Then you have Japan, this rising island nation that sees Russia expanding into Manchuria and Korea as a direct threat to its very existence. So you have two empires, same goal, same piece of land. A collision was basically inevitable. And for Japan, this whole thing was deeply personal. See, back in 1895, they had actually won Port Arthur, fair and square, in a war with China. But then Russia, along with Germany and France, stepped in and basically bullied Japan into handing it over. And then, just 2 years later, Russia turns around and takes the port for itself. In Japan, this was seen as a massive national dishonor, a humiliation that just had to be avenged. The Japanese military knew that Russia was pouring reinforcements into the Far East using the new Trans-Siberian Railway. It was a race against time. If they were gonna strike, they had to do it soon. So by early 1904, after one last round of negotiations failed, Japan realized Russia was just stalling. The decision was made. It was time for war.
So, with all the talking done, the fate of the entire region was going to be decided by naval firepower. The actual battle for Port Arthur happened in two very different phases over less than a day. So the first phase was that night attack. It was led by the legendary Admiral Togo. He sent in 10 destroyers, and they slipped right past the Russian patrols. Some people even say they used stolen harbor defense plans to get through the minefields. Their mission was dead simple. Get in, launch your torpedoes at those lit-up targets, and get the heck out before the Russians even knew what hit them. In all the chaos and confusion of that night, the Japanese destroyers launched a total of 16 torpedoes at the Russian fleet. But here's the thing. Only 3 of them actually hit. The The rest either missed, they malfunctioned, or they got tangled in torpedo nets. But wow, did those 3 hits count? They were devastatingly effective, crippling 2 of Russia's absolute best battleships and a major cruiser. So the next morning, Admiral Togo gets a report from his scout ships, and the message basically says the Russian fleet looks paralyzed, just in total disarray. Believing he had landed a knockout blow, Togo makes a really bold call. He's going to press the attack with his entire main fleet and finish the job right then and there. But as Togo's fleet steamed towards the harbor, he was in for a rude awakening. The Russian fleet was far from paralyzed. They were active, they were shooting back, and, this is critical, they were supported by the massive guns of Port Arthur's shore batteries. The fleets were still very, very evenly matched. For 40 straight minutes, the 2 fleets just pounded each other. It was a total slugfest. But with those Russian shore batteries raining down shells on his ships, Togo realized his mistake. He was risking his precious battleships for very little gain. He was a smart commander. He gave the order to pull back. And that was the end of the first major naval battle of the 20th century. So, tactically, you'd call the battle a draw. No ships were actually sunk on either side. But strategically, oh, this was a massive, decisive victory for Japan. And the reason why is because this battle, and the siege that came after it, offered a terrifying glimpse into the future of war. Look, historians call this World War I for a really good reason. All the tools that would come to define the slaughter of World War I, they were all tested here a full decade early. You had machine guns defending fixed positions, massive howitzers firing from miles away, armies digging themselves into the earth in vast trench networks, all protected by barbed wire. It was a full dress rehearsal for the industrial-scale conflict that was coming. And the chilling part is, European military observers were there, watching all of it, but they tragically failed to learn the right lessons. The immediate outcome of this short, 40-minute firefight sent shockwaves around the entire globe. It literally redrew the map of power in ways that almost no one saw coming. Okay, let's just break down the consequences. First, the Russian fleet was now bottled up in port. Japan had control of the seas. That meant they could land their armies in Korea and Manchuria, which was their main goal. Second, the victory just stunned the world. An Asian power had defeated a European giant, which completely upended all these colonial-era ideas about racial superiority. Third, that tactic, a surprise attack before a formal declaration of war, well, that would be studied and repeated, most famously at Pearl Harbor. And finally, back in Russia, the failure at Port Arthur was so humiliating that it helped trigger the massive unrest of the 1905 revolution, which nearly toppled the Tsar. The Battle of Port Arthur is just this powerful reminder that the opening shots of the next big conflict, they're often fired long before anyone really expects them, using technologies and tactics that make all the old rules of war obsolete. And it leaves us with a pretty critical question to think about. What warnings are we ignoring today?